Hello, everyone. I see that there is 5 of you in here. We'll give it a couple more seconds before we start the webinar today. We're really excited to have you here and talk about timekeeping, how our software makes it easier, and we hope to give you some answers that maybe you've been having questions to in regards to the HR topic of it and then the HR software of it. So we'll wait just a couple more seconds. Make sure everyone is able to get on. And then as well, while I'm thinking about it, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat at any time. I know that for me, if I don't ask a question, I will forget it. So send it in the chat, and then once we get to the end of the webinar, we can address all of them and make sure that either we answer it along the way or we will make sure to get to it at the end. Okay. You ready, Ryan?
I'm ready.
And so is my cat. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here for this HR for Health webinar. My name is Taylor Danko, and I'm the marketing coordinator here. And today we are going to give you 13 employee time tracking tips to keep you legal. So we're going to navigate the thrills and spills of HR made effortless as we dive into timekeeping, overtime, and timesheets. Stay tuned as we transform time from a ticking bomb to trusted buddy through the HR for Health's clever solutions. And so I'm going to show you and introduce you to Ryann, who is the product specialist here at HR for Health, and she's an HR software expert and a vital member of our team. She is skilled at increasing efficiency and effectiveness for our healthcare customers. Her secret weapon is using autopilot for HR for Health software, having it do a lot of these functions by itself and making sure that it keeps you compliant without you even having to think about it. And then the agenda, which looks insanely long. I know this might look like a syllabus from college, but listen, today we're going to go over a brief introduction of why we care about this topic, and then we are going to have a pop quiz and assess the situation of what we're dealing with today in terms of our attendees that are with us and what you're currently doing right now to track time for your employees. We're going to talk about all things related to timekeeping with HR for Health. And then we're going to break down each of these very specific features within the software and why it matters to have each of these, which I really like that we're going to go into today, because I think that when I am personally looking at different softwares and we have to assess like what other HR softwares are out there, there's a ton of features that everyone lists, and I believe it's really important that we make sure to tell you why we have these features, why have we put them in, and why HR for Health is truly dedicated to healthcare professionals. And that's what 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are going to go through. And then the last 2 bits of today's session, we are going to sum up those 13 tips and put it on the screen for you. And then we're going to take the Q&A at the very end and answer any questions, and then we'll give you our contact information to make sure that you're able to reach out to us via email or phone call. Ask us anything that you forgot to today. And so for the next slide, I'm going to, oh wait, I was getting ahead of myself. I'm going to tell you who we are. We are HR for Health, and our mission is to simplify HR processes and make them less stressful for businesses of all sizes. We bring to the table a combination of HR expertise and technologically advanced solutions, which is our super fun and fancy way to say that our HR for Health software works across practices, across states, across cities. It doesn't matter the size of your practice. HR for Health is adaptable to each of those. And we want to combine the amazingness of HR, which we know everyone really loves to learn about, and we want to combine that with technology to make it a lot easier, because let's be honest, at least I didn't go to law school, so I can't tell you all of the HR laws and employment laws, and you really shouldn't have to learn all of that either, because that's not your jam, and it wasn't for me either. So we have a software that'll tell you what laws are changing and everything that you need to know. And now the next slide is the introduction. And I want to tell you about the 2023 State of HR report. And in this report, you can use your phone if you're at a computer to scan this. If not, I'm going to send you an email after this webinar to make sure that you have access to it as well. But based on this report that we conducted of over 1,500 people that we surveyed, 41% of those respondents identified that tardiness is their biggest employee issue. And even more niche than that is that our survey responses came from healthcare professionals. So tardiness is a big issue across the board. And why does that matter? Why do we care about people being tardy? What does it matter that an employee is not showing up on time other than it being extremely annoying? Tardiness raises concerns about extended patient wait times. So that has a domino effect. If your employee is late, then the rest of the agenda, that run of show for that practice that day, gets pushed in a lot of other ways. And those increased staff hours also degrade the quality of care that you're having. So imagine if that one employee, it might not sound like a big deal if it's just one person that's always showing up late, but imagine how frustrating it might be if another employee relies on them to get their work done and they're not showing up on time. And I imagine that it makes a lot more frustrations come up in healthcare practice, because quality care is really important and making sure that you are there for your patients is really important. So we've given you the problem, and what's the solution? The solution is using a time clock system that is electronic and that aids in reducing tardiness, disruptions, and delays, improving overall productivity and efficiency of the organization. So we care about the problem, which is tardiness, and the solution is by using a time clock. And that time clock is fully built into the HR for Health software. And we're going to show you all of those features that help tardiness. So it's not just about clocking in, but it's having accountability. It's having the location of the employee and showing where are they clocking in, because that also matters, and making sure that the whole team is able to function efficiently and productively as a team. And I think that's the last part for this one, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Look at that. Now it's time for a pop quiz. I know I said there was a syllabus at the beginning, but I swear we're not back in college. So now Ryan can take over this pop quiz.
Everyone's favorite thing. Don't worry, it's not too hard. But before we start this, let's start thinking about your answers. I'm sure you have them already because it's a really simple question. But hey, everyone, thank you for joining us today. Of course, we'll be going over timekeeping, overtime, and timesheet projects, and why HR for Health will ensure that you are operating in compliance with your state laws. But again, we're going to do this short Q&A here. So the first question, do you currently use a practice management system for timekeeping? So it looks like so far we have 100% yes. All right. Oh, we got 25% no. Don't know the exact numbers here, but thank you guys for voting. We'll give it just a couple more seconds here. All right. Do you want to go to the next question? So far, sure. 83% of you said yes, that you are using a practice management system for timekeeping. Hopefully today you will see that you need something a little bit more efficient so that you're not spending so much time in the practice management system with those timesheets. 17% said no. All right, next question. Have you ever edited your employees' timesheets? Honest answers here.
We won't tell anyone. This is a safe space.
We're here to help. All right. Got some answers trickling in. We'll give you guys a couple more seconds. All right, so 86% of you said yes and 14% of you said no. Later today in this webinar, you are going to see why maybe it's not the best idea, but don't worry, again, we're not going to say anything. We're going to give you the solution instead. All right, next question. Do you have employees who are working overtime and shouldn't be? Go ahead and get those answers in. Oh, this is really close.
I know. I'm super
Some of
surprised
you
by
guys
that
got,
answer, actually.
I know, you guys got some good employees. So far, 56% said yes. So don't worry, we have some things that can help you there. And 44% said no. I'm so curious what you're doing. That's great
Yeah, I
job.
would like to know too.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. So if you answered yes to any of the questions above, don't worry, you're not alone. Again, this webinar is going to shed light on why maybe your answer should have been no and how to make that happen. So timekeeping, why should you choose HR for Health time clock? So HR for Health was built with compliance in mind and specifically for your industry. So unlike other timekeeping systems that leave you to choose your own settings on how you pay overtime or auto clocks out your employees or allows them to, where you have to edit your time, their timesheets, we base timekeeping based on your state specific laws to ensure that you are paying your employees accordingly. So for example, if you are located in California, your overtime will be calculated on a daily basis for anything worked over 8 hours in a day and a weekly basis, which would be anything over 40 hours in a week. However, if you're in a state that does not have daily overtime, your overtime would be based on the federal law of any hours worked in excess of 40 hours in a work week. So again, it's state specific. So if you're in Georgia, it's going to be based on Georgia laws. If you're in Utah, it'll be based on Utah laws. Wherever you're located, we have you covered. We also understand that some ways of timekeeping may be riskier than others, which is why our product focuses on ways to keep you more protected from and keep you at less risk for legal claims. With HR for Health, there's no need to, Google what are the overtime laws for California and then try to interpret them. And of course, in California, the laws are changing all of the time, so you never know what's going to happen. There's also no need to, ask your peers what they are doing and hope that what they're doing is right. A lot of times we hear, I've been doing this for years, or this was what the previous owner did, so I thought it was correct. And trust me, most of the time it isn't. All right. So the first thing that our time clock is really great about is employees can only clock in from authorized locations. This means that your employees have to be at your practice and connected to your practice's Wi-Fi in order to clock in. We often hear that employees are clocking in from their car or in the parking lot or while they're getting coffee 2 doors down. And of course, we want to avoid that. Or, maybe you're using paper tracking methods of timekeeping, so it's all written and not actually the time that they were there ready to start working. And, that's actually pretty common. So we want to avoid that. Ensuring that the clock-in access is only available when your employees are at the practice and connected to Wi-Fi ensures that they are ready to start working. So not, putting their lunch in the fridge and grabbing coffee and chit-chatting before they're actually ready to start working. And if you are concerned about employees using their cell phone, don't have any fear. We do have preferences where you can turn this off. However, if you want them to be able to use their phones to clock in and out, we do have the ability to turn that feature on so that you have more flexibility. I'm sure too, some practices don't have large offices, so if you only have 1 or 2 computers, you're able to allow them to use their phones to clock in and clock out. Next, we have an audit trail. So when it comes to employees forgetting to clock in and clock out, we have actually created a system of checks and balances and push your employees to be more accountable for their timesheets. So when an employee forgets to clock in and clock out, they can add manual timesheet entries or edit their timesheets. But once they are edited, you as the employer or office manager will receive an alert and an email letting you know that that timesheet was edited. From there, you're able to go ahead and approve that timesheet entry. But before you approve it, you can see when it was edited, by who, you can see the IP address that it was edited from. So for example, maybe they came in at, 8:05 and they were supposed to be there at 8 a.m. You can see if maybe they changed their timesheet, which maybe wasn't correct. So you have that whole audit trail. This way of doing things ensures that the timesheet has the employee's electronic thumbprint, and this is where it comes into play. It leaves an audit trail, and this can be extremely helpful if the employee ever tries to go after your practice for wage and hour claims. And we do hear all the time, oh, my employees would never do that. But what we see is that it does happen. It happens often. So having that audit trail as your backup just ensures that you're covered. And again, it has that employee's electronic thumbprint, it does have that date stamp, and it does have the IP address stamp. And it does show that the authorized user only approved it, so they weren't the one actually editing that timesheet. So for all of you that said that you edit your timesheets out there, this would be something that can help keep you protected. All right, next, another feature that is super important that helps keep you in compliance is our meal and rest break reminders. When employees clock in, we do remind them to take their mandatory meal and rest breaks. This break reminder is a good way to keep you in compliance because as an employer, you're only responsible for letting your employee know that they have the right to take their break. The reminder does pop up every time they clock in. So if they clock in at the beginning of their shift, they are given that reminder, and after they get back from their meal break, when they clock back again, they're given that alert reminder as well. And you'll actually see that later today when we go ahead and do a quick demo. All right, a pain point that we know that a lot of people have is tracking tardiness. So it is hard to keep employees accountable if there is no documentation of when employees are scheduled to work and they're not clocking in. So with HR for Health, you are able to set up what's called a tardiness threshold and add your employee's schedule. So if they clock in after that threshold, you will be alerted to that tardy instance. And you can mark it as excused or not excused. From the employee's perspective, when they log in and they clock in late, it does actually tell them that they were tardy. So they do have to put in a note of why that happened. Maybe they were stuck in traffic, maybe there's some excuse, but at least you have that documentation there in case you ever need it in the future, especially if maybe a violation is needed, or maybe if you're heading down a road to termination, you'll have that documentation in place and that transparency between the employees so they know it's coming. It wouldn't be a surprise to them. That documentation also keeps you safe as well. All right, per diem employees and overtime. So another really great feature that HR for Health timekeeping helps with is the tracking of per diem employee hours. We often hear from clients that they do not have their per diem employees use the time clock that the rest of their employees use because they are on per day pay. This is actually super risky. So making sure that your per diem employees use a compliant time clock is really important to keeping you safe. Although per diem employees are paid on a daily basis, they are technically considered non-exempt employees, which means that they are eligible to receive overtime based on your state laws. So if you are in California, again, that would be anything over 8 hours in a day. And if you're, not in California, it would be anything over 40 hours in a work week. And so if that per diem employee is using the time clock, our time clock actually tracks the days that they work and the number of hours to ensure that once you go to run a payroll report, you can see both the days and the hours to make sure that you're paying any overtime applicably. All right. So overtime in HR for Health. We obviously have touched base on overtime so far a couple of times within the webinar. So it's tracked based on your state. So if you sign up and you are located in Washington, of course, it's going to track based on Washington laws, which is great. There's no manual tracking or calculations needed, which is super beneficial because, overtime, it can get tricky sometimes, which we'll get into, but also it's a manual calculation, and who has time for that? All right, so the first thing that we have that's really cool that our system does is weighted averages. So basically, what does this mean, weighted averages? There's two different ways to track overtime within HR for Health. You can either do highest weekly rate or weighted average. And the difference between the two is highest weekly rate means that if an employee worked at two different rates of pay, so for example, maybe their regular rate of pay is $25 per hour, and then maybe you pay your employees a little bit less for training, so $20 per hour. Any overtime worked with the highest weekly rate would be paid at time and a half of the $25. But with a weighted average calculates the amount of hours employees worked at each rate and then calculates an average for overtime. HR for Health, of course, does this calculation for you because we know that you're super busy and do not need to spend your valuable time doing math. I don't even want to do that. So nothing manual on your end. Over time, with a weighted average, you are able to save money because if your employees are constantly going into overtime for, I think, the 44% of you, over time, you would save money with that weighted average since you're not paying that highest weekly rate anytime they go into overtime. Next, non-discretionary bonus overtime tracking. So I don't know, you may not know this, but discretionary bonuses are applicable for overtime. A non-discretionary bonus is based on standards that have to be met in order to receive such a payment or such bonus, and most bonuses are considered non-discretionary. Employees basically need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get it, and this also includes any commission-based bonuses. So if and when an employee work overtime while working towards a bonus, their calculations for additional wages are owed has to happen. Of course, that would mean more manual calculations are needed on your part unless you have a software like HR for Health to handle this and take that tedious task away from you. So the good news is HR for Health does that. Anytime you assign an employee a bonus and they've worked overtime during that time, our system will automatically add the overtime hours needed to that bonus. So you don't have to do that manually. Of course, if it's not a non-discretionary bonus, so a discretionary bonus, which can be set up in our system as well, that overtime would not apply. Oh, we have one more thing. Another thing that our system actually does is accommodate if you are an alternative work schedule. So this would be more so for our California clients. And if that alternative work schedule is registered with the state of California, we can actually set this up in our system. So obviously with an alternative work schedule, all overtime would need to be tracked a little bit differently for this. So we are able to set up in our system as well as base it on the schedule that you observe. So for example, if you have a 4 days a week, 10-hour days, we can set that up. Or if you have 4 days a week, 9-hour days, really whatever schedule that you have registered with the state, we have you covered there too. So you don't have to worry, of course, about manually tracking that overtime if you are on an alternative work schedule. All right, now getting a little bit more into overtime and ways that we can kind of avoid that or help you avoid that in the system. And that would be through our Watchdog emails and our early notifications. So we talked about overtime calculations, but what about the ways to cut down? We also have ways to help you there with the early notifications and our Watchdog reports. If you have issues with employees clocking in too early and going into unapproved overtime, we do have a feature where you can set up to receive email notifications if your employees clock in early based on the amount of time or minutes that you've set up. So let's just say I want to be alerted if my employee clocks in 10 minutes before their scheduled shift. You would get an email notification if they clock in before that time frame. That way you can address the issue. And then the Watchdog report is a report that is sent to you daily and shows you any employees that have gone into overtime for that day. This way you can address the issue with the employee. And we do often get asked if there's ways to block employees from clocking in too early or automatically clock them out. And we do not do this. Again, for compliance purposes, we want to make sure that if the employee is clocked in and working, that they're getting paid for that work. If they shouldn't be working because that overtime was not approved, that's definitely more of an employee conversation that you need to have and remind them what your policies are for overtime. All right, timesheet projects. So Another really cool thing is we do have the ability to track multiple rates of pay if your employees work at different rates of pay or different locations. So there's different ways to track that with our timesheet projects. Not having a system that can accommodate this tracking can leave you calculating times on your own and can lead to human error and employees not being paid appropriately. So again, making sure that we're automating this and using a system that will help you, not go against you. HR for Health projects feature allows you to set up secondary rates of pay that your employees can be assigned to and clock into. So for example, if your employees should be paid time and a half their regular rate for Saturdays, this can be set up in projects and employees can clock into that specific project on Saturdays. However, if you need to track an employee who is working at a different location, so for example, maybe they're working at a San Francisco location on some days and an Oakland location on other days, you are able to set up a project labeled with those location names that employees can clock into. And then when you run a payroll report, you'll be able to see how many hours were worked at each location in case you need it for overhead purposes. So really cool there. And let's go ahead and get into our software and we'll show you how that works. All right, let me get signed in here. All right, here's my tester account. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what you're looking at for those who have never used HR for Health before. So anytime you log in, you'll be brought to your dashboard. You have items on your to-do list. So these are documents that I need to sign, performance reviews that I need to complete on my end, any time and pay alerts, so timesheets that need to be approved or time off that needs to be approved. And here is my waiting for section. So these would be anything that I'm waiting for my team to complete on their end. So for example, I have a lot of employees here in my tester account that need to complete their documents. So just a really good way to keep you updated on what's happening in your office and what's needed to get done. Also in HR for Health, we have a resource center. So if you're not familiar with it, this has a lot of good information for you. Any law updates for your state will show up in the resource center, as well as any minimum wage updates. So it can be very useful. We have our feature releases. So anytime we release a new feature or an improvement to features, we do alert you here. You have access to that. You have access to support resources, so any FAQ questions, or if you're like, how do I edit a timesheet, or how does my employee edit a timesheet because I shouldn't do that, you have access to the support resource that will tell you how to do that. And your employees also have access to those FAQs that are just applicable for them. So nothing that they shouldn't have access to, just their FAQs. If you ever want to give us feedback on our software, if you're like, yeah, I don't like the way this works, we love to hear from you. So you have a software feedback option. And of course, any webinars and events that you want to attend, you have access to right here. So just a quick little thing there. But let's go ahead and get into timesheet projects first. So timesheet projects can be set up underneath our time clock section on the left navigation bar. And it's really simple to do. I have two in here that I set up already. We have a meeting that's set to be 75% of an employee's pay, and we have a different location here. So now we're going to add another one. We're going to add a Saturday rate. And we're going to be nice and say that anytime an employee works on Saturday, they're going to get 1.5 times their regular rate of pay. So we're going to do a rate multiplier. You do have the option to do a per hour. So maybe you're like, no, I want to give them a flat rate. You can do that by selecting the per hour and, of course, typing in the appropriate amount. And once you click submit, it is ready to go. We see it here. You can also assign it to specific employees. So maybe only one of your employees works that Saturday rate. You can go ahead and assign it to them, and it won't show up for other employees. Next, we'll go ahead and create location fee so you can see what that would look like. You don't have to add in a custom rate if you're just tracking a location. You just put the name, and of course, you can assign it to specific people if you want to. So now that we have those, I'm going to go home, and here in the top right corner, I have my clock in button. If I have no projects, it would just show clock in, but because I do have those projects in there, I do have a drop-down menu. So here I can go ahead and clock into a specific project that we have set up. So for example, maybe location A, I can clock into that. Oh, and here's our tardy feature. So it looks like I clocked in late. This is what would pop up for your employee if they did clock in late based on what you've added in for their tardy threshold. So here I'm going to go ahead and click add a tardy note, and I'll say traffic and add a note. I am an authorized user, so it does give me the option to excuse or unexcuse. As an employee, they will not have access to excuse their own tardy. As an authorized user, so for example, what my portal looks like is I'm an employer. I have access to do that, but again, employees will not. And then you'll see the tardy here. You can also see my tardy thresholds. It's a little funky, but basically I work Wednesdays at 9 a.m. and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Really easy schedule. So if I ever clock in late based on that tardy threshold, so I have a 0 grace period, meaning I have to clock in on time or else. And I also have an early notification if I clock in before 10 minutes before my shift. So 8:50 on Wednesdays. All right, and I think we missed something here. So let me clock out real quick. I'm going to clock back in, and you'll see this yellow banner. This is a reminder to take their mandatory meal and rest breaks. So that keeps you covered, remember, because the employer only needs to let the employee know that they have the option to take their rest break. So you got that banner at the top, and that happens every time they clock in and clock out. Sorry, clock in and then clock back in from lunch, not clock out. So I'm going to go to my timesheets real quick, and we're going to take a look at my projects here. So here's what it would kind of look like. Of course, the time would be a lot longer than just a second or two, but here you can see that the employee worked at location A at the beginning of their day and then just worked at their regular rate, so that standard clock in, at the second part of their day. And then if I clock out, I can clock back into a different one. So maybe I went over and decided to clock into Saturday pay. I would then have that on my timesheet as well. And what's nice with this is that if I go to run a payroll report in our system, I'm going to clock out again, I can actually see how many hours were worked at both rates of pay, which is super helpful. Let me just choose myself for this. So here are my hours. I know not very much, 0.06, but here I can see the hours worked for each project, which is super beneficial if you need those times. Of course, if you use our payroll, this is something that you would just take a look at, make sure it's correct, and you would be able to close your payroll, submit it, and it would go to our payroll software, our payroll team to process. All right, well, that is it for the demo. Make sure if you have any questions, you put those in the questions or the chat for us later. Let me present. All right. Did you catch all that?
Is everyone still awake? Thank you, Ryan. Oh my goodness, that was a lot to go through. So let's give you the quick rundown of what we talked about. And that included authorized locations, having accountability, an audit trail with you, so everything's in writing, and meal and rest break reminders, tardiness tracking, per diem employees. I put that twice. I will fix that before I send it to you in the email later. Overtime management, early notifications, managing multiple rates, and managing multiple locations. That is a brief summary over a lot of content that we just covered. So let's go ahead and move into the live Q&A section where you can ask us anything. Well, you know what? I won't be loose with that word. You can ask us questions related to timekeeping. Let me pull up and see if we have any questions. So far, nothing yet.
Test our knowledge. Let's see what we're doing today at the today's Wednesday, close to the end of the day. Let's test my brain power here.
Let's see. Oh, Kathy asked, is there a tool or utility for using the time clock? My team logs in and saves their LP on browser.
So the tool, like an outside tool. So
I
basically,
think that's what it means.
Yeah, so for clocking in and clocking out, we do require employees to log into HR for Health and clock in. It is important for them to log in because just like you saw on my dashboard as an authorized user, employees also have that dashboard that shows any to-do items that are needed, any alerts. Again, it does show them that banner, which is super important, that reminds them to take their mandatory meal and rest breaks. So if they did have a way to clock in outside of, like, I don't know, like a finger bio whatever print, instead of actually logging into HR for Health, they wouldn't see that added compliance there. So yeah, they have to log into HR for Health in order to get clocked in. Good question. All right. Let's see, login password, they keep it open. Can you expand on that question? What is the overtime rule? I wonder if you're asking if they forget to like sign out of their account. Go ahead and type that in. If you could get it a little bit clearer, I could probably answer that. Overtime rule for Illinois. I don't have that on hand, unfortunately, from an HR perspective. Our software has that information for sure, but we can go ahead and get you the answer to the overtime rule in Illinois after the webinar. Great question. Okay. Okay, so employees are keeping their basically whatever software is open on their browser. So what we actually do have is a timeout system. So if they're logged into their account, it does time out after 15 minutes. So if they're leaving it open and you're really worried about that, it will automatically log them out. We do have some improvements coming later that will help. I won't expand on it yet just because it's not quite in our system yet, but we are working on improvements to kind of add preferences for you in the future that will help with that issue. We do have other clients that have that issue as well. All right, great questions, guys. Any others?
I know that was such riveting information.
HR
is so difficult. Even while I was helping Ryan put this presentation together, that is a lot of laws, policies, regulations, math, everything put together. So if you can find a way to reduce the possibility of an extra gray hair, then HR for Health might be your solution to that.
Yes, unless you like gray hairs. That's like gray hairs.
That's true. That is it. That is it. I can't wait for my natural ones to come in because that is like what the cool people are doing now, is letting it all grow out. Anyone else?
Awesome.
I don't see anything. Okay, and then let's show, perfect. Here is our contact information with our email, hello@hrforhealth.com, a phone number, and our website, our main website link. I am part of Gen Z and don't like to call people, so please feel free to email us at any time, and we have a whole team that's listed on hello@hrforhealth.com. We will make sure to get back to you and direct your question to where it needs to go and help you feel confident about your questions in HR for Health, and that we can support you with any compliance related questions, HR questions, and employee relations. But I don't see any other questions coming in, and I won't keep you all forever. So with that, Ryan, do you have anything else to add?
No, thank you guys for joining. We really appreciate being able to give you all the information and sign up.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.